So, Sal. So we're gonna, in this week and next week, we're gonna finish Exodus. And it's been a journey. It's been upwards to about 5 months or so. And then including Genesis, it's been the better part of a year. So we've been doing these first two books. So the first thing is, I would love for you all, unless you've got strong opinions now, give it a week and think about what you would like to do next, Bible study wise, after Exodus. And if necessary, I'll take a poll. You can shoot me an email or something too. Let's see. One of the logical things I would have done is probably the Gospel of Mark, but we did that 3 years ago because it's the lectionary one. So it's probably not soon enough to do that all over again. So anyway, think about something. If you want to switch to the New Testament, we can go there. That's fine. We're going to take a little bit of a break. So after next week is our last one of Exodus, then we're off for 3 Wednesdays. And one of them is Vacation Bible School. And then the other 2, I'm out of town, helping my mom move. So when I'm back, we'll start the new book, whatever that is, which should be August 11th. I think that's the Wednesday. I think that's right. Yes, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yes, all right. August 11th. Okay. I did not hear back from my beloved Professor Judy Fentress-Williams, but I think she might be traveling or off for the summer. So I am holding out hope. I'm not giving up hope that she will say she's got some time to do like a one-off Zoom with us to talk about Exodus. But if I don't hear from her before next week, I might, I have some of her audio bootlegged, so I might steal some of it and just put a picture of her up, and we'll listen to some things and kind of have some, next week will be more of a summary of all of Exodus, just kind of look back on everything we did. For now, we're on the start of chapter 38, if memory serves. And we're in the tail end of the book, and where we are, and bless you all for still showing up. We're still talking about all the details of the altar space and the tent dwelling and the Ark of the Covenant and all of these little modus operandi of putting everything together for the worship of God. And I think it was last week. Actually, I will say the conversation last week, which just kind of came off top of our heads about how we get about patriotic things like folding the flag in a funeral, that directly influenced my sermon this last Sunday. So I guess I'm saying thank you for having a good conversation, because I've went and marinated on all things America. So
by the way, that was a beautiful sermon.
Thank you. I was not fishing for that, but I appreciate it.
No, it really was. It was one of the best sermons.
Oh, thank you.
I've read all around.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. It's okay to be, hopefully it's the takeaway. It's okay to wear red, white, and blue and go to fireworks and all that and still feel a little conflicted. Yeah. You can still be patriotic and be conflicted, I think. So there you have it. Okay, so we're on chapter 38, and I'm going to read from the Common English Bible again, and let's see if we can get through some of this. A narrative will be picking back up eventually, I promise. Okay, I think we immediately left off with making of some wood and incense, so now we're kind of picking up almost mid-thought. He made the altar. Who are we talking about? Oh, Bezalel, one of Moses' assistants. He made the altar for entirely burned offerings out of acacia wood. The altar was square, 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. It was 4.5 feet high. He made horns for it, 1 horn on each of its 4 corners. Its horns were attached to the altar, and he covered it with copper. He made all the altar's equipment, the pails, the shovels, the bowls, the meat forks, and the trays. He made all its equipment out of copper. He made a grate for the altar of copper mesh underneath its bottom edge and extending halfway up to the middle of the altar. He made 4 rings for each of the 4 corners of the copper grate to house the poles. He made the poles out of acacia wood and covered them with copper. He put the poles through the rings so that the poles were on the 2 sides of the altar when it was carried. He made the altar with planks, but hollow inside. He made the copper wash basin with its copper stand from the copper mirrors among the ranks of women assigned to the meeting tent's entrance. They dropped a little note there, ranks of women assigned to the meeting tent's entrance. Sounds like early days of bouncers, kind of. He also set up the courtyard. The courtyard south side had drapes of fine twisted linen stretching 150 feet with 20 posts, 20 copper bases, silver hooks and bands for the posts. Likewise, the north side stretched 150 feet with 20 posts, 20 copper bases and silver hooks and bands for the posts. On the west side, the drapes stretched 75 feet with their 10 posts, their 10 bases, and silver hooks and bands for the posts. The front side facing east was 75 feet. There were 22.5 feet of drapes on one side with 3 posts and 3 bases for them. Likewise, there were 22.5 feet of drapes on the other side of the plaza's gate with 3 posts and 3 bases for them. All the drapes around the courtyard were made of fine twisted linen. The bases for the posts were made of copper, but the hooks for the posts and the bands were made out of silver. The tops of the posts were covered with silver, and all the posts surrounding the courtyard had silver bands. The screen for the gate into the courtyard was made with blue, purple, and deep red yarns and fine twisted linen, decorated with needlework. It was 30 feet long, and along the width of it, 7.5 feet high, corresponding to the court's drapes. It had 4 posts, their 4 copper bases, their silver hooks, and their tops and bands covered with silver. All the tent pegs for the dwelling and for the courtyard all around were made of copper. These are the accounts of the dwelling, the covenant dwelling, that were recorded at Moses' instructions. They are the work of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, Aaron the priest's son. Bezalel, Uri's son, and Hur's grandson from the tribe of Judah, made everything that the Lord had commanded Moses to make. Working with Bezalel was Oholiab, let's see here. I guess I have to think about this one. Hisamach's son from the tribe of Dan, who was a gem cutter, a designer, and a needle worker in blue, purple, and deep red yarns and in fine linen. Well, this Oholiab sounds like a really crafty person. The total amount of the gold that was used for construction of the whole sanctuary, gold from the uplifted offerings, was 29 kikars and 730 shekels in weight, measured by the sanctuary shekel. The silver from the community census totaled 100 kikars and 1,775 shekels in weight, measured by the sanctuary shekel. They gave a bekwa per person, that is half a shekel, measured by the sanctuary shekel, for everyone who was counted in the census. 20 years old and above, 603, 550,000 men. 100 kikars of silver were used to cast the bases for the sanctuary and base for the veil. 100 bases from 100 kikars of silver, 1 kikar for every base. He used 1,775 shekels of silver to make the hooks for the posts, cover their tops, and make bands for them. The amount of copper from the uplifted offering was 70 kikars and 2,400 shekels in weight. He used it to make the bases for the meeting tent's entrance, the copper altar, its copper grate, and all the altar's equipment. The bases all around the courtyard and the bases for the courtyard's gate, all the dwelling tent pegs and all the tent pegs used around the courtyard. Okay. Just looking at my notes here, these verses presented a complete inventory of all the materials donated by the Israelites. The donations were given in the context of a census of all Israelite men over 20 years of age, which totaled 603,550 men. So we've come a long way from Abraham and Sarah. The seed now numbers many, 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 including in this particular group of Israelites, 603,550. And you know, if there's anything, I guess, redeeming, for lack of a better word, about this passage, is just a little, I guess you could find it kind of a warm comfort for those that really get excited about the opulence in your sanctuaries. So we didn't talk about too much, but we don't have them, but many, many big churches do have really incredible windows, you know, Tiffany, for example. And these things tend to cost a fortune, and they tend to cost a fortune in upkeep and renovations and all of those things. I'm not saying we're headed towards that on ours, because they're not. Don't worry, they look okay. But you know, so there will always be two factions of a church that will say, God, can't we just give that money to the poor? And then the other side saying, we've got to keep, somebody has to be responsible for this. We have to keep it up and we have to do our thing. So those two sides will always be in tension. I remember our senior class gift discussion in seminary. So the graduating class, we spent the better part of the year trying to decide what is our gift back to the seminary. And there was so much grumbling of all the people. I should have been grumbling, saying how much money we've already given in tuition. But then there was the next discussion then becomes, why can't we just donate it all to a food bank and then give a card to the seminary? And it was a learning experience about how that's just not how we do things. We have to give. In fact, somebody floated that idea to the administration. They said, we're kind of looking more for things like we need done, like a facade renovation, some benches, stuff to go in the new chapel, all that. So it was eye-opening and learning experience. It was kind of a little bit of what happens in churches, synagogues, et cetera, when you're concerned about making it look nice, but you're also holding that intention with what are we really doing here? What's our mission? So I don't have a solution to that.
My translation says bronze instead of
mine says bronze. Yeah, you said, and I think everybody else probably has
maybe
bronze.
I misread. That'd be funny if I misread consistently.
No, I think
I know.
Yeah,
I
okay.
just wondered if they were.
That's neat. Copper.
At that time, interchangeable or?
It's bronze in here too. They must have considered it interchangeable. Yeah. I see bronze there. And then in the NRSV, it's bronze also.
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
Well, the color is similar.
Yeah,
But
it could
copper
be.
is more gold than bronze is more. brown.
And copper doesn't stay
No, it turns
copper.
green.
It ends up being.
That is a really interesting point. I wonder.
Bronze is actually copper with just a little bit of tin in it to keep it, or give it a little more firmness and a little more, durability.
Now, did you know that, or did you look that up?
I knew it was an amalgam. I just had to look up if it was, well, my son is into a lot of these role-playing games and stuff like that. And so there's a distinction and also in history, there's the Bronze Age is pretty important. That's when weapons increased in effectiveness because bronze is a little more hard and durable than copper is.
Amazing. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, David. I've always thought they were completely two separate metals. That's so interesting. Because bronze is not on the periodic table, is it? No, copper is, but not bronze.
It's an amalgam. Yeah.
Wow. Neat. Okay. Well, so the CEB Bible is on an island, basically using copper instead of bronze for some reason. So I don't know the story there. They don't have it in the notes. But I do see in the note again on verse 8. There's a suggestion that some of the Israelite women worked in some capacity in service to the Lord's meeting tent. So it isn't quite as clear cut as all the men will do all the tent stuff for the Lord and women stay away. Actually, the women were there, kind of a de facto altar guild in many ways. So any other thoughts or questions or misery being in all these? Leslie.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were reading all of the silver and the copper and all the things that they used, of all of this came from the Egyptians, because back in the early, I don't know if that was in the early Exodus when they left, they went and they got all sorts of stuff from the Egyptians, jewels, and because a lot of those jewels that we talked about earlier on, which go on the priest's clothing, were all jewels and everything was taken from the Egyptians when they left. And I just thought it was interesting that the Egyptians were the ones who actually supplied all of this stuff for the Israelites to use. Even though I'm not remembering now how it all came about for them to get it. But I just thought it was interesting that it was, you know, because you were thinking, how did they get all, you know, these people were slaves. They didn't have jewels sitting in their pantry, or their, you know, their cupboards and stuff like that. They had to get it from somewhere, because they weren't paid much. They wouldn't have all that stuff at home.
A great point.
I thought that was interesting anyway.
Because you imagine sometime later an Egyptian's going to wander into their land and see all these houses, and they go, "Isn't that my copper?" I wonder if that you took it all and built your own places out of it. So that's a good point. So yeah, the rescue from Egypt is still showing its bounty in many ways all this time later. Right, let's deal with some of the priest clothing real quick, which you would think would be my favorite chapter, but I'm just going to try to breeze through this one, and I'm going to switch to Robert Alter's translation as well. Okay, chapter 39. And from the indigo and the purple and the crimson, they made service garments to serve in the sanctuary. And they made the sacred garments that were Aaron's, as the Lord had charged Moses. And he made the ephod of gold, indigo, and purple, and crimson, and twisted linen. And they pounded out the sheets of gold and cut strands to work into the indigo, and into the purple, and into the crimson, and into the linen designer's work. Joining shoulder pieces they made for it, at its two edges they were joined. And the ornamented band that was on it was of a piece with it, fashioned like it, gold, indigo, and purple, and crimson, and twisted linen, as the Lord had charged Moses. And they made the carnelian stones ringed with frames of gold, engraved with seal engravings with the names of Israel's sons. And he set them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod, stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel, as the Lord had charged Moses. And he made the breastplate, designer's work, like the work of the ephod, gold, indigo, and purple, and crimson, and twisted linen. It was square, and they made the breastplate doubled, a span its length, and a span its width, doubled. And they set it in 4 rows of stones, a row of ruby, topaz, and malachite, the first row. In the second row, turquoise, sapphire, and amethyst. And the third row, jacinth, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Jacinth, agate, and crystal. And the fourth row, beryl, carnelian, and jasper, framed in gold in their settings. And the stones were according to the names of Israel's sons, 12 according to their names, seal engravings, each with its name for the 12 tribes. And they made on the breastplate intertwined cord work, chains of pure gold. And they made 2 golden frames and 2 golden rings. And they set the 2 rings on the 2 edges of the breastplate. And they set the 2 golden cords on the 2 rings at the edges of the breastplate. And the 2 ends of the 2 cords they set in the 2 frames, and they set them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. And they made 2 golden rings and set them on the 2 edges of the breastplate at its border, which faces the ephod on the inside. And they made 2 golden rings and set them on the 2 shoulder pieces of the ephod below in the front, opposite its seam above the band of the ephod. And they fastened the breastplate from its rings to the rings of the ephod. With an indigo strand to be upon the band of the ephod, that the breastplate not slip from the ephod, as the Lord had charged Moses. And he made a robe for the ephod weaver's work, through and through indigo, and the opening of the robe in the middle of it like the opening of a coat of mail, a border for its opening all around, so it should not tear. And they made on the hem of the robe pomegranates of indigo and purple and crimson, twisted linen. And they made bells of pure gold and set the bells within the pomegranates of the hem of the robe all around, within the pomegranates. A bell and a pomegranate on the hem of the robe all around, to serve as the Lord had charged Moses. And they made tunics of twisted linen, weaver's work, for Aaron and his sons, and the turban, linen, and the ornaments of the headgear, linen and the breeches of linen, twisted linen, and the sash, twisted linen, and indigo and purple and crimson, embroidered work, as the Lord had charged Moses. And they made a diadem, a sacred crown of pure gold, and wrote upon it in a seal engravings inscription, "Holy to the Lord." And they put it on an indigo strand to put on the turban above, as the Lord had charged Moses. And all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was completed, and the Israelites did all that the Lord had charged Moses. Thus they did. And they thought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent and all its furnishings, its clasps, not thought, brought. And they brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent and all its furnishings, its clasps, its boards, its crossbars, and its posts and its sockets, and the covering of red and ram skins, and the covering of Asher dyed skins, and the curtain of the screen, the ark of the covenant and its poles and the cover, the table and all its furnishings, and the bread of the presence, the pure lampstand, its lamps, lamps of the array, and all its furnishings, and oil for the light, and the golden altar, and the anointing oil, and the aromatic incense, and the screen of the entrance of the tent, the bronze altar and the bronze grating that belongs to it, its poles and all its furnishings, the laver and its stand, the hangings of the court and its posts, and its sockets, and the screen for the gate of the court and its pegs, and all the furnishings of the service of the tabernacle for the tent of meeting, the service garments to serve in the sanctuary, and the sacred garments for Aaron the priest, and the garments of his sons to be priests. As all that the Lord had charged Moses, thus the Israelites did all the work. And Moses saw all the tasks, and look, they had done it as the Lord had charged. Thus they had done it, and Moses blessed them. You might have been thinking, couldn't they have just gotten away with just verse 43? But clearly not. This is all very important to them. I've made statement before, and you can hold me to it, that I'm dubious of all of these times it says the Lord had charged Moses. Either Moses is taking advantage of the Israelites' goodwill, or it's just gone that way down through time. Where did we get all these directions from? I think God told Moses it on the hill, but we aren't there to verify, so we don't know. But it was important to them somehow, and it ended up in Scripture. So, any questions or any funny words that came up?
They have been very, very heavy.
Yeah, extremely heavy.
Wasn't it hot in the desert?
It's hot in the desert, and plus, remember, they were moving. They were on the move because they're trying to get to Canaan.
I know the pomegranates we have. Are they maybe just not the same thing?
I think it's got to be the same thing because it's really it's from the Middle East, right? I think it's Turkish, or not Turkish, but they eat it a lot in Turkish.
The ones I've seen are
pretty big.
Kind of big, so they hung those.
Yeah.
The bell.
Well, they ought to get pretty smelly after a while too.
Get the red juice on your fingers. Oof. Something I read. I wanted to see what you all said.
Or were those embroidered or?
Oh, not
Or,
fruit. Oh.
was that all embroidered maybe instead of actual
fruit
hanging? But what
hard to say.
What did the pomegranate at that time signify? They would adorn,
Or was it all that was available?
My guess would be it would be just one of the more opulent fruits, because it's even to this day, you cut into a pomegranate and it's like, whoa, this is a little different than an apple. But I know it's really indigenous to the area, so it's hard to say. It sounds like they're making it almost like ornaments on a Christmas tree in many ways, I wanted to see what your translations had for something I read. 39, where were we? A bell and a pomegranate. Where is it? Holy to the Lord, verse 30. What does your verses say? The translation of the engraving, they put a seal on there, and that said on this, and on two of mine it says "Holy to the Lord."
Yeah, that's what mine says, all caps.
Mine says holiness.
Holiness. Interesting.
Mine says holy to the Lord.
And it's all caps?
Yeah, mine is
no.
caps.
Yeah.
Yes, it is, but it's italic.
Oh, no, mine's just all caps, regular.
So, it's interesting because it's not unlike in our churches now where there's text kind of engraved into the wall. So in ours, there really isn't, except in some of the glass occasionally, but actually the part, this would be a good exercise to I dare you to find a church that doesn't have some kind of motto or engraving or scripture quotes, or something. Ours doesn't have it on the building per se. It has it on the baptismal font. And of course, I can't tell you what it is right now, but it's got something written in there. In the seminary chapel, it was a line from scripture, go into the world and make disciples of all the nations.
It's a jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah.
Cut out face.
What's that on the font?
On the stained glass window, we have when they replaced it, it looks like a.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something else somebody told me about, that there was something else and I've never been able to find the something else.
Like a little hidden surprise?
Yeah.
Pam would know. Darn.
No, I don't think she knows either.
So anyway, they've decided their motto is holy to the Lord. And the Lord is the name of God, Yahweh, holy to Yahweh. But I like Diane's translation that just says holiness, you know.
Yeah.
So just kind of reminding people, it's basically like saying you're entering a house of worship.
What is it?
If anybody's interested, I did look up pomegranate in terms of symbolism. And Jewish tradition teaches that the pomegranate is a symbol of righteousness, because it is said to have 613 seeds, which corresponds with the 613 mitzvot or commandments, so of the Torah. So for this reason, it's customary to eat pomegranates on Rosh Hashanah. So the pomegranate represents fruitfulness, knowledge, learning, and wisdom. So there was some special significance of the pomegranate to Jewish tradition. So,
wow. David, you're like the judges on Jeopardy. This is great. I'll just kick it to you. Judges, can you accept this? I love it. Awesome. All right, and that brings us to chapter 40. And if I'm not mistaken, if memory serves, a narrative is going to take back over. So let me just do a quick check here. So this means probably a different tradition, source tradition is writing now. So all up until this point, wrong book. Remember back to when we talked about Richard Friedman. I know a man named Jeremiah Friedman. Richard Friedman's seminal work on the sources of the Torah, that there are different sources, either they're labeled J, EP, that kind of thing. In Exodus, you know, the sources are all over the place. It's not very consistent. So just shows it's been cobbled together over time. But primarily what we've heard is clearly a tradition that's very priestly and concerned with worship. And sure enough, that's right. The priestly tradition wrote chapters 35, a little bit of 34, all the way down to where we're at now. And actually, much to my surprise, chapter 40 is by them too. Okay, never mind. So it's interesting. They do have the ability. It's almost like switching from their worship hat to their preaching hat. And now they're going to kind of summarize it here, chapter 40 and all. But it's kind of interesting that one whole tradition is responsible for the final, third of this book. But that's also why they're probably the ones most interested in all the details on the altar, as clergy tend to be. Would anyone like to read chapter 40, maybe verse 1 to 15? We'll go a little slow. And remember, next week we're gonna revisit pieces. Is that you, Leslie?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. What translation are you looking at?
I'm at the NRSV.
Okay, great.
The Lord spoke to Moses. On the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. You shall put in it the ark of the covenant, and you shall screen the ark with the curtain. You shall bring in the table and arrange its settings, and you shall bring in the lampstand and set up its lamps. You shall put the golden altar for incense before the ark of the covenant, and set up the screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. You shall set the altar of burnt offerings before the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, and place the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. You shall set up the court all around and hang up the screen for the gate of the court. Then you shall take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all that is in it, and consecrate it and all its furniture, so that it shall become holy. You shall also anoint the altar of burnt offering and all its utensils, and consecrate the altar, so that the altar shall be most holy. You shall also anoint the baking stand and consecrate it. Then you shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and shall wash them with water. And put on Aaron the sacred vestments, and you shall anoint him and consecrate him, so that he may serve me as priest. You shall bring his sons also and put tunics on them, and anoint them as you anointed their father, that they may serve me as priests, and their anointing shall admit them to a perpetual priesthood throughout all generations to come.
Excellent. Thank you. From my notes here, the Lord tells Moses to carry out 3 major tasks: set up the tent dwelling and all its objects. Number 2, anoint with oil and make holy the tent dwelling and its objects. And then number 3, anoint Aaron and his priests as well. Moses will complete this first task, spoiler alert, but the second and third tasks will only be completed later in the book of Leviticus, just so you know. Okay.
This, I think this first section here, 15, shows the priestly source influence, because the priestly source comes specifically from the Aaronic priesthood, and they emphasize the consecration of his sons here. So I think that's, an important part of this particular source. Yeah.
Because I was thinking about the difference between the purpose of the altar in the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Yeah.
Thinking how the New Testament, the altar is basically to set the table. And then in the Old Testament, the purpose of the altar was to sacrifice or sacrifices.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's and let me just tweak the vocabulary for a second. It's more that it's not necessarily the testaments, but it's more like ancient Israel and Christianity.
Okay.
Because in the New Testament, technically, they're still doing the temple altars, right? But you're absolutely right. And what, of course, who's the common denominator? Well, not the common denominator. Who's the agent of change in that is Jesus, because Jesus takes the Passover meal, which itself was, commemorating, kind of making a way for the average, Hebrew to kind of participate in a little mini sacrifice at home, if that makes sense. So kind of like doing your own little worship service at home. Jesus takes that and kind of transforms it for us into the Last Supper, which becomes the Eucharist. And you're right, then table becomes more of euphemism for a place to gather, for a place for the community. For us, it's vital to our worship identity that, we do communion each week, and we are proverbially around the table, even though we're not quite literally around the table. Most churches now that get designed tend to be in a kind of square or circular shape. It's kind of a postmodern concept, which really completes the idea that the altar's in the middle of people and we're all at one big banquet together. But all of those elements of sacrifice, blood sacrifice, burnt offering sacrifice that we've been going through here in detail, that is still lurking in the background of any service of communion, especially because we're talking about Jesus as kind of the new altar sacrifice. That makes any sense, even though it was by his own volition. That's all of that metaphor kind of gets sandwiched up together. So you're absolutely right, Ann, that it's funny how the altar moves from a place for that kind of sacrifice to a place of table and community and fellowship. And yet at the same time, this gets back to our discussion about high church and low church. Your own piety may influence how you treat an altar when you're around it,
But there's some correlations here with what goes on today, because like when you were ordained a priest, the garments and the blessings and anointing, all those things, there's some similarities there. And then today we use the chrism oil.
Right.
And so they're anointing with oil. It's probably with spices. just like our chrism oil is.
Exactly.
So it's all, to me, it's some of our traditions are coming from some of
They
this.
are, absolutely.
From the Jewish traditions.
It's amazing. Yeah. Okay, verse 16. Would anyone like to read 16 to maybe 33? Okay, great, Ann.
Moses did everything exactly as the Lord had commanded him. In the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, the dwelling was set up. Moses set up the dwelling. He laid out its bases. He set up its boards, inserted its bars, and raised up its posts. He spread the tent out over the dwelling, and he put the covering of the tent over it, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He took the covenant document and placed it inside the chest. He put the poles on the chest, and he set the cover on top of the chest. He brought the chest into the dwelling. He set up the veil as a screen to hide from view the chest containing the covenant, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He placed the table in the meeting tent on the north side of the dwelling, outside the veil. He set the bread in its proper place on the table in the Lord's presence, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the lampstand in the meeting tent opposite the table on the south side of the dwelling. He set up the lamps in the Lord's presence, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the gold altar in the meeting tent in front of the veil. He burned sweet-smelling incense on it, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He also set up the screen at the entrance to the dwelling. He placed the altar for entirely burned offerings at the entrance to the meeting tent dwelling. He offered the entirely burnt offering and the grain offering on it, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the wash basin between the meeting tent and the altar and put the water in it for washing. Moses, Aaron, and his sons used it to wash their hands and their feet. Whenever they went into the meeting tent and whenever they approached the altar, they washed themselves just as the Lord had commanded Moses. He set up the courtyard around the dwelling and the altar, and he hung up the screen at the courtyard's gate.
Thank you.
You want me to continue?
No, actually stop right there because there's a text discrepancy that I bet some of you are noticing. Verse 33, some end it right where Ann ended it and others continue it. There's a little segment.
Yeah. Right.
And the reason is that phrase is really critical actually, but what do you have?
So Moses finished the work.
Moses finished the work. Is that what everybody else has?
Yeah.
But its discrepancy is whether that's part of the next section or not, right? Whether that's part of verse 33. It looks like, generally speaking, it's verse 33 actually, but at some point in time, somebody took that little piece separately. The reason it's important, Moses completes his work and there is lots of this work and it's supposed to tie back to Genesis 1 when God completed his work in Genesis. It's the same text. I'm trying to read the Hebrew, but I'm so see what the words really are, but apparently it's the same words as God completing God's tasks and resting on the seventh day. So that's a nice little piece there at the end. And then the cloud returns. I'm going to read from the NRSV here. The cloud covered the tent of meeting and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on each stage of their journey. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out until the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, before the eyes of all the house of Israel at each stage of their journey. The end.
So they move this thing every day.
They move this thing. Well, sometimes they're probably there for several days. And then God would decide it's time to move. And then a little tornado disappears and then they follow it. That's basically kind of the supernatural story they're telling here. Yeah.
That's a lot of work.
It's a lot
up and down.
A lot of work. So now again, when I struggle with this, I try to picture something a little more concrete historically, which would be like our settlers in America. And I I would suspect that much of their travel was weather driven, right? So if it's like last week when it was raining every day here, I guess we're not moving, you know. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm just hypothesizing. And then when it's sunny like this, you know, now we're good to go. Wagons hoe, let's start moving. It's kind of that same kind of concept. However, Hebrews are attributing it to God. You know, God's making it just, again, God is the cause of the weather in their mind, which, you know, not wrong theologically. So if the cloud or the storm kind of departs, I mean, it is a little bit like if you were drawing a children's Bible, you want to just like put a little rain cloud or something over the tents. It's kind of the idea here, but.
Well, I think your correlation to the early settlers has to be true, because when they first landed here on this, the Pilgrims and stuff, they didn't land at the right time of the year,
right,
for crops. And then you always hear in all the history stuff, you know, if they're traveling west, they got to get through the mountains before the snow. And so, to me, there's a lot of correlation with that.
Exactly, there is.
Great.
Yes. Question.
And my disclaimer, once again, is I'm not familiar with the Bible.
Okay, that's right. Neither am I. Yeah. Go ahead.
In the verses 22 to 23, it's in the Message, it says the bread with a capital B was arranged. So I'm
which verse is that?
It's in my, and it's verses 22 to 23.
Okay.
Just the normal.
And it says, neat. Outside the curtain and arranged the bread, and it has a capital B, there before God, just as God had commanded him.
Wow.
So mine's lowercase.
That's interesting.
What
this is the
That's the message.
Oh.
So I mean, I thought the bread didn't really have other than being sustenance.
Yeah.
I was thinking that the bread really had the significance, you know, at the Last Supper.
Interesting.
Why would it be capitalized?
Yeah, why would it be capitalized?
What does it show? It doesn't mention that in your version.
No,
it doesn't.
None of the rest of them are caps.
I'm just checking the notes here. Let me just see.
That's interesting.
I wonder if Eugene Peterson, who did the Message, is trying to make a point about bread, you know, that it's almost consecrated. Yeah. And
our consecration of the.
But in the way we capitalize him when we talk about God, there's kind of a thing there.
So maybe that's where it comes from when Jesus has the Last Supper.
Maybe. You're right. Maybe.
But it's odd that it's not in other versions.
Yeah. It is odd.
It is. That it's only in that one.
Okay.
There's nothing.
We're on it before the Lord. That's the Lord.
Oh, I'm skipping ahead. Moses, I don't know how I messed this up in my head, but you know, we're on our way to the promised land, right? And then this book ends in what is essentially kind of a cliffhanger. You know, I mean, not a cliffhanger in the truest sense, but you know, they didn't get to the journey, you know, they didn't get to the end of the journey there. So they're still moving. So again, we'll talk about this more next week, but the first half roughly of the book was all about that Exodus moment in Egypt. And now the second half has been all about this journey from there to the promised land, you know, the place where the land of milk and honey, as it says. Then comes the next, now think about this context in the context of its Torah, and I'll review this next week, the first 5 books. The next one is Leviticus, so it's going to kind of take a pause and talk about all the laws, 613 of them, I think. And then, because clearly we didn't get the laws right in Exodus, so we're going to have to go back and do all the details. Then we're going to do, I mean, I'm not saying we are doing this, but just as you know, just so you know, in the Bible, then comes Numbers, which often sounds like it's just going to be a list of things too. But remember, the name Numbers comes from the English. The Hebrew name is something entirely different. And I think it's wilderness, actually, because the first sentence in Numbers is the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. So it basically shows you that Numbers is a story of them still in the wilderness, right? Yeah. Then you get to Deuteronomy, which again is the Englishy title, and I think that book is called Words, because these are the words that Moses spoke to Israel. But I'll do my homework before next week.
Final speeches that Moses gave to the Israelites.
Yep, and then Deuteronomy ends finally with Moses's death. So the Torah is attributed to Moses. The first 5 books are attributed to Moses, and quite fittingly, Moses dies, but quite famously, Moses dies before ever reaching the promised land. And that's not in Exodus, but I just wanted you to kind of get a lay of the land a little bit too.
So they're going to actually cover 38 years in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they were only in the second year of Leviticus.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I think that's where I read it, either Leviticus or Numbers. It was the second year. When, oh, and in the desert, when Moses was down in the desert, it was in the second year.
And then
we're there for 40 years.
Okay, so that is a long time, right? And he's already old.
Yeah, in this little short period of time, they're going to cover another 38 years.
So again, we know that they're being a little fuzzy with their math on the numbers. What they're calling years is probably more metaphorically, right? Not quite.
Not the same.
But I think also it's just helpful to know after, just so you're not afraid of the Old Testament when you look at it, just like, where do you begin? There is a kind of logic to it, because after the Torah, we go into a book of writings. Sorry, I don't have my board here. And that would be Joshua, who is the Joshua that we've been met already, kind of his leader of his army. Judges, Ruth, 2 books of Samuel, 2 books of Kings, 2 books of Chronicles, all of that telling a narrative basically about the growth of Israel, before you get into all of the prophets and all of those things that come later in the book, in the Old Testament. So anyway, okay, so next week we will continue to ponder the ending. We'll kind of revisit some pieces of 40. I will have some multimedia to share to just kind of sum up Exodus, and because I know it's been a while since we were back in the Prince of Egypt days, so we'll kind of do a little review, just kind of get so you have the whole lay of the land again, and then just kind of talk about our kind of final thoughts and reactions to it all. Does that work for everybody? Excellent. Thank you all. This was great. Leslie, David, good to have you. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good luck at the doctor's later.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
All the best.